Great. Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and privilege to address this meeting. And we hear a lot about the levelling up agenda. And what I would like to do is give you my perspective on the levelling up agenda and really some personal thoughts as to why the manufacturing community really should seize this agenda, because I really believe they're absolutely central to it. So can I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk about some of the problems that the UK has gone into the current crisis with, problems of productivity, problems of regional imbalance. And I want to pull apart a little bit the UK economy and demonstrate to you why manufacturing really is so important. And having done that, a few thoughts about how we should focus industrial policy and the role particularly of the high value manufacturing catapult in that. So with the next slide, please. So I want to stress that the UK, we've had a very difficult year. We've got more unpredictability coming up as we finally leave the transition period and exit the EU finally. But I want to stress that we've got some fairly long-standing problems in the UK economy, and I think that those problems will still be with us, and we really need to focus attention on them. So the next slide shows what I'm talking about a bit. Economic growth has essentially stalled, and this is really reflected in stagnating living standards. And actually, a lot, I think, about current politics can be understood in this light. If we look at UK labour productivity, that's the amount of value that's produced by an hour's labour. What you see on the left is that this has grown since the 70s, actually before that. There's been a long period where productivity grew really rather steadily at about 2% a year. And the global financial crisis really threw a complete spanner into that. You can see after 2008, not only did productivity take a temporary fall as the financial crisis took hold, it's never recovered. Productivity growth has never recovered, and this gap has opened up between what the economy would have achieved had that pre-crisis trend continued and what it's actually achieved. And that translates, I mean, labour productivity sounds like a abstract economic construction, but it feeds directly into living standards, and so what people feel like. It directly translates into the gap in UK average real wages that we've seen. So essentially, even before the crisis, we were all about 20% worse off than we would have been otherwise. Next slide, please. So that's one problem. The other problem is that the UK is a deeply divided economy. We've got the southeast of the country looks like a northern European country. It's as as productive as the Netherlands or Germany. But outside the southeast, we've got a country that looks much more like, in many cases, actually much worse than East Germany. It looks much more comparable to to southern Italy, Portugal, or Spain. So I think this is a point that's not probably understood enough. Our centralised political and media system means I don't think people realise this enough. Another reason why people don't realise this is on the next slide. If we take another perspective on this, the inequality is in productivity. Actually, the inequality is less pronounced in living standards because the UK runs a transfer union. So money generated in the productive parts of the country, London and the southeast, is in effect transferred to the rest of the country to kind of even out living standards. So when we talk about levelling up, I mean, I'm kind of quite sensitive to the accusation that I'm a whinging northerner talking about how grim it is in the north. Actually, another way of thinking about this is that levelling up is actually about letting London and the southeast keep more of their own money. It's about making the rest of the country pay its own way a little bit more. And of course, one of the reasons why it doesn't pay its own way is although current spending is transferred from the prosperous parts to the less productive parts, the kinds of investments that we make that could drive productivity up aren't transferred. So this next slide shows us. If we look at research and development, R&D spending is very highly concentrated in London, the east of England, and the southeast. So this plot shows R&D spending broken down both into public and private R&D spending by NUTS2 regions. And essentially those three regions on the right hand side, that's London, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, and East Anglia, so basically London, Oxford and Cambridge and their environs, receive about 46% of all public and charitable spending on R&D. So the money that the government puts in that could be that we'd hope drove the economy by driving innovation, we focus it on those places that are already prosperous, and that doesn't make sense. Another paradox is that the public sector funding is even more concentrated than the private sector funding. Actually, the private sector spreads its R&D money around the country much more. So you see places like Cheshire, Herefordshire, West Midlands, East Midlands, where there's actually quite thriving private sector innovation ecosystems that are not being supported by the public sector. And I think that's perverse, and I think that needs to change. So if we go to the next slide, please. What I want to talk now about is where productivity comes from. What's the UK economy look like? What drives this growth? So the next slide shows a bit of a map of the UK economy. What this map shows is on the y-axis, I've got how much the long run change in productivity, how much total factor productivity, as the economists call it. That's the efficiency with which we get value out from given inputs of capital spending and labour inputs. So that's the kind of a measure of how dynamic this bit of the economy is, how much it's driving productivity growth. And on the x-axis, I've got how big a share of the economy it is by GVA. So in a sense, the higher up, further up on the y-axis, the more dynamic, the further along on the x-axis, the more important. So it's those bits at the top right-hand corner that are really important for the UK economy. And actually, there are three sectors that I think are crucially important. Information and communication, ICT, which has seen technological advances that have really pushed the economy forward. Then we've got manufacturing, and then we've got professional technical admin services, knowledge intensive business services. I will say, of course, this is how you measure sectors is always slightly arguable. And there's a great paper from the Institute for Manufacturing, from Ian O'Sullivan, called "Inside the Black Box of Manufacturing," which actually starts to question how much of the knowledge-intensive business services actually is associated with manufacturing. So this, I think, stresses why manufacturing is so important. Next slide breaks that down a bit more. Of course, manufacturing is composed of many things. And so we've got very dynamic and important areas. Transport equipment, undoubtedly the case. Aerospace and automotive are vital. Chemicals and chemical products is an area that I think doesn't receive enough attention from policymakers. Again, very strong growth. The next few slides, I want to talk about time dependence, how this has changed with time. So here are some plots about how productivity has evolved. What you see is that actually manufacturing lagged behind the whole economy in the 90s, but there's been a period in which manufacturing's done pretty well. Its productivity growth has been faster than the whole economy throughout the 2000s, and it's leveled off a little bit since the financial crisis. Next slide shows some fast growing sectors. Of course, it's interesting to look at finance, of course, which many people think is tremendously important. Finance did grow its productivity grew very strongly in the 90s due to after deregulation. Then I think we've seen a bit of a bubble, and the productivity of finance has actually been decreasing since the global financial crisis. Transport equipment, so automotive and aerospace, had a fantastic spurt of productivity from 2010 or so, and I think that's an underappreciated effect of industrial policy. Next slide, please. Here's some others. Pharma was a very strong performer in the 2000s. It suffered a big reverse from 2010 for reasons that are interesting, but I haven't got time to go into. Chemicals, I think chemicals is a sector that's underappreciated. It's just keeps on steadily growing all the time. So I think you can see from this that the high value parts of manufacturing that really have been consistent drivers of the economy in a way that finance, for example, it produced this great bubble, but that's really gone away. So this, I think, stresses why manufacturing is so important. So next slide. What should industrial policy focus on? Tim Mitchell mentioned already David Sainsbury's book, which is great and really worth reading for why creating competitive advantage through technological innovation is so important for economies. This went out of fashion in the 80s and 90s, this idea of vertical industrial strategy, looking at specific sectors. That, I think, was a mistake. We've seen some return to sector-based industrial strategy since the global financial crisis, and the Catapult was part of that, and I think it's been a success. The question I think we now need to look at is what best fixes these problems that I started with: stagnant productivity, regional economic disparities. And I think two things. I think we need sectors with a high potential for productivity growth. I think we do need to recognise the economy. Not all parts of the economy have the same potential for growth, and so we should focus on those ones that are going to produce the benefits. And we do need to think about levelling up. So we need to look at the economically underperforming parts of the country. I think big national priorities like net zero are also crucial. And what I'd argue is manufacturing supports all these goals. So we need to increase its scale, we need more of it, and we need to grow its productivity. Just want to come on to the regional dimension. Great feature about manufacturing is that it is concentrated outside the rich Greater Southeast. So here's some location quotients. This refers to the degree to which manufacturing is over, or sectors are overrepresented in employment, and you can see in a way manufacturing is pretty much the inverse of the current productivity per head argument. So manufacturing is a paradoxical in the sense that manufacturing has demonstrated high productivity growth. It's also in regions that are that are overall, their overall economies is not productive enough. So this tells us we need to increase the scale of manufacturing outside the southeast and improve its productivity. Next plot just shows, of course, this different regions have different concentrations. There's electrical equipment. Next slide, please. Motor vehicles, everybody knows, big concentration in the West Midlands. Next slide, please. Other transport equipment, you see East Midlands, the Southwest, and Lancashire. The point about this is, of course, that manufacturing is localised. There are clusters, and I think it's important that we can build on those clusters, strengthen them, improve support the great companies that already exist in those clusters, support them in getting bigger and getting more productive. So that's the regional dimension. So the next slide, I really must talk about net zero, because I think it's absolutely crucial. The white paper was out on Monday. I think actually a really encouraging white paper. Dick's already mentioned net zero in his State of the Nation. And my plot here shows you greenhouse gas emissions so far. Actually, we've done okay. The UK has done pretty well in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's done it by doing the easy things. It's exported quite a lot of heavy industry, which is not necessarily a good way as far as the planet's concerned. We've had the dash to gas in electricity generation, and we've achieved 50% low carbon electricity through biomass, offshore wind, and keeping our old nuclear plants going. But the red line shows the huge challenge that we face of getting this down to zero by 2050. And on the right hand side, we need to go much further. A whole range of new technologies, all of which involve massive manufacturing challenges: new nuclear, carbon capture and storage, batteries, hydrogen, electric vehicles, synthetic aviation fuel, the whole problem of decarbonising the housing sector, net zero dwellings, again hydrogen. So a massive range of challenges that the manufacturing sector has to step up for. So what's the role of HVMC in all this? Next slide, please. If we look at HVMC, I don't think this was thought through when it was designed, but the way it's worked out, it's not too bad. The geographical distribution is very helpful. I think it needs to be expanded. And of course, from Manchester, it's obvious that it needs a centre in Manchester. We need to preserve and grow those clusters, develop regional innovation systems, and have skills at all levels. So the next slide, please. I think HVM Catapult should be at the centre of this innovation system. It should work as a national network, maintain its deep connection to business, and I think it needs to get really strongly integrated into the university research base, and I think that's important. So to conclude, I think high value manufacturing is crucial for driving productivity growth, crucial for correcting regional economic imbalances. Got to tackle these big priorities like net zero. It's a big collective effort. Business, research based, government agencies all have to work together on this. So thanks very much.